Whether it be the anime, manga, or games, there is always something additional regarding Shisui and his legacy. However, throughout all three of those mediums, almost no content creator or fan alike have been able to actually piece together and reconcile a truly accurate and compelling description of Shisui's true power. So today, me and my good buddy Sage at Thick Calves are back once again with several hours of research to find out if Shisui's lore could be reconciled through the medians, and if Shisui was actually as strong or strong enough to beat even the Akatsuki. But do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and a bit of the video structure real quick?
Yeah, it's good to be here, first of all. Always good whenever Virtue and Sage get together. It's like the dynamic duo, Batman and Robin, obviously I'm Batman. I'm kidding.
Bro, I was about to say, like, oh god, awful comparison.
No, I'm happy to be on the page, bro. I'm really excited to see or to put out some really good content here. But essentially, the structure of the video is basically what it sounds like. We're going to be taking Shisui after we kind of tell you guys how strong he should reasonably be, and putting him against each Akatsuki member and just talking about how he does. I think that you guys are going to be surprised by a lot of these. Some of these you won't be surprised by at all. But yeah, we got some really good stuff to talk to you guys about. So that's basically it.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess I can first discuss how strong is Shisui, and although before doing that I want to preface that the manga holds almost a neutral stance on most of Shisui's lore, including things like his Susanoo and things along those lines, something expanded on more through how the Naruto Storm Revolution game has an accurate design of Shisui and his Susanoo, which Kishimoto drew himself, and him coming up with the design. And supplementing this, Shisui is also displayed with his green Susanoo drill and the official Naruto Top 99 artwork, despite Shisui still having his typical sword on his back. And funny enough, the anime also holds consistent to this interpretation of it being possible, as you'll note that Shisui's eye chakra color, as noted by Al, is actually green in the anime, like the Susanoo, which is kind of funny. Therefore, this first initial example of Shisui truly possessing a Susanoo very well could be true when reconstructing how each medium displays Shisui, and while the manga does hold a neutral stance due to Shisui not being ever really shown, it is still noted throughout the manga by characters like Yashiro Uchiha, who is 45 years old and potentially could have experienced both the Second and Third War, states that Shisui was one of the most talented ever in the clan and was the greatest ever at body flicker, hence to his name, Shisui the Teleporter. Such a name, the Naruto birthday columns have to make a note of that he was feared by shinobi of all nations, which is why Killer Bee instantly recognized the name and its valor, which is supported by how he could in fact move so fast that like his body flicker could project after images, something never done by like any other Uchiha member or village pillar during Shisui's age, or really anybody else, which fits with how Danzo notes that Shisui has the reputation of being the strongest Uchiha in the Storm game, which neither the novel or manga hold much disagreement toward, either, seen as both the chapter 223 and third anime profile guide state that the fireball jutsu, which is kind of like what defines an Uchiha shinobi's capacity, which is really telling, as Itachi, after gloating about the size of his own, makes a couple remarks that like only Shisui and his father Fugaku could ever replicate one of this size, implying that the top three of the Uchiha according to the novel would really be that Fugaku, Shisui, and Itachi, and this is kind of consistent with how nobody ever really attempts to overthrow Fugaku, for example. Like, he is just their leader. So this should also just stand true, as Fugaku was like at one point considered a candidate for the fourth Hokage, which should also just stand as an advocate for him standing at the peak of, or at least this top three standing at the peak of Konoha, as standing at the peak of the Uchiha also warrants the village to fall under that as well, because they are stated to be the strongest clan in Konoha in those anime profile guides. But Fugaku being above Shisui probably just isn't true, or at least Not in the way it might seem, seeing as Fugaku is highlighted to have genjutsu that can bypass Itachi's Sharingan to show genjutsu of a demonstration of how he would control the Nine Tails with genjutsu. However, Shisui's MS is much more focused on genjutsu, with it being called the strongest genjutsu ever by characters like a much older Itachi. Even Shisui's MS, when they were practically children, could drop elite shinobi like Mukaiko Inada in 1/1000th of a second, which is the same time frame given for Kirin, which is stated by Zetsu to be similar to the Amaterasu and how it's impossible to dodge, showing some pretty high ends for Shisui's MS Genjutsu, which already doesn't require eye contact, at least for the Kodo Matsukami. Fugaku is obviously inferior to Itachi in kunai throwing as implied by Sasuke as a kid, and Itachi concedes that Shisui is better than him at shuriken throwing by quite a bit. Therefore, Shisui has superior speed according to his body flicker speeds, better basic shinobi skills, and better genjutsu and MS techniques, and he has extremely relative high level fire style, such as the aforementioned fireball that's not only stronger than Itachi's, but is also strong enough that it takes multiple water style users to actually cancel it out in the anime, making this very possible that when, Danzo remarks that Shisui and Itachi are stronger than anybody else, in the entire clan, despite there being no knowledge of Shisui's Mangekyo, when there is in fact knowledge of Fugaku's in Konoha's intelligence files, according to the Boruto anime, it's actually a lowball, and Shisui might be able to do it alone, or at least get really close, especially with his MS, and it's just that Itachi being there and his potential helps secure that idea of this three-tome Itachi being able to actually win, which does fit with how the novel also highlights that the Uchiha wanted Shisui to actually kidnap Hiruzen in his own manner, which would presumably be guarded by Anbu Black Ops, and when Shisui died, the whole clan decided to cut off this plan and delay the entire coup d'etat. If Fugaku being manipulated by the more radical faction was actually that strong, he should have been able to do this, but once again, it's Shisui who is likely the strongest in the clan, something once again implied by Danzo in the games, making this just really good supporting evidence for Shisui being the strongest Uchiha. And while Shisui may not be stronger than Fugaku to the same degree he is to Itachi, like how, Itachi and Shisui can spar without their MSs, and Shisui is up by in wins by double or something, which is supported by the games, where Shisui kind of just brags to little kid Sasuke that he's a lot stronger than Itachi, who doesn't even argue back at all. And even potentially an even potentially higher route for Shisui's power would be interpreting a statement from Itachi during the massacre in a certain way, and that's when Itachi states, quote, "Shisui would have tried to protect the clan to the end, in which case they would have ended up enemies. Maybe it was fortunate that they parted as friends on that day." End quote. Now, the higher interpretation of this would be arguing that Itachi believes it's fortunate that they parted when they did, as Shisui would try to stop him, meaning that he would have been someone able to stop him for sure, halting Itachi's plan entirely. Although the second interpretation, and one I might side with as well, or at least add to the first one, would be how it just seems more like Itachi doesn't want to have to face his past and what he's actually doing to his best friend and face the interaction he would have with his best friend while he's killing their entire family. However, if you were to take the first option, maybe you could just extend, their extensive training together and narrative of Shisui appealing to Hiruzen, Itachi appeals to Danzo, with Hiruzen being the superior fighter, as maybe a measurement of comparison, then by all means that's fine. You could also assert that Shisui, if, he were to be above this Itachi by any large margin, then he would also just scale above Obito as well, seeing as Itachi can cut through Obito's aura, which is something power correlated throughout this novel, whether it be Obito's paralyzing aura or Sasuke's aura in the other room, or Danzo's words having an indescribable power and aura. The two also then just acknowledge each other as opponents, as, openers after they kind of clear the bloodlust in the air, when Itachi affirms that he would kill Obito, and it's not a matter of if, ands, or buts about it. But that's neither here nor there, as neither I nor Sage really subscribe to this super high end for Shisui. But I guess, do you want to talk about the different Danzo encounters and where they differ and why one should be certainly more canon than the other?
Yeah, and quickly, just to add on to what you were saying in regards to how Shisui is regarded in the village at the time, we actually have a really interesting statement from the Naruto website birthday column on him that talks about how he was rising to fame in the village to the point where he kind of is implied to be taking the place of the Sannin and even somebody like Minato, because they're not around, in the sense that he is going to be one of the most foremost shinobi to protect the village. So it's like, okay, now that Minato's gone and the Sannin are out of the village, basically what that's communicating to us is when you look around, he's one of the next people up, you know? So, like, it's really an interesting statement, because then if you examine the village, who else is in the village at that point in time? You've got people like Danzo, you've got obviously like Hiruzen is doing his thing, you know, he's the strongest in the village, but then you've got Anbu Kakashi, you've got Fugaku, who else? You know what I mean? Like, it's at that point in time, it's really interesting that he kind of is thrown into this mix of characters who are these forefront protectors of the village, and that's not something I think should be taken lightly. So it doesn't necessarily mean he scales to that level, just that he's kind of being regarded in that same way. So that is a big deal. But in terms of sort of how people like to downplay him with the Danzo encounters, first of all, I just want to say, we basically get 3 different versions of this, and the Revolution game version is highly debatable as to whether or not it's canon. The anime version, I would say you could probably just throw it out. I mean, it totally diverts from what we see in the other material in a few different ways, and like just makes him look really bad. But I would say, honestly, if people are trying to use the Revolution version to kind of like downplay him, you're just being dishonest, because at the end of the day, whenever you look at those 3 different pieces of material, the one that is clearly the most canon, the one that has been put on a manga canon timeline by Shueisha, the publisher of the Naruto IP, is the novel, right? So let's take a look at what happens in the novel and why it's really not an anti-feat for him. So he goes to meet with Danzo, right? Or he's going to take out Fugaku, essentially, and Danzo confronts him, and he ends up getting poisoned by these bugs. Now, this poison is not only a paralytic poison, it's a lethal poison. And while this is happening, he's unable to move, unable to do anything, and he's trying just to make, like, a hand sign and get out of there, but he can't until he gets his eyeball pulled out, because it kind of, like, shoots adrenaline through his body. It kind of shocks him out of this paralytic state, and then he's able to raise his hand, right, into the right tiger hand sign. And because we whenever we see him use body flicker, he always does that, whether it be anime, whether it be, you know, whatever. So raise his hand into the right tiger hand sign, and body flicker out of there so fast that Danzo was unable to perceive it, right? And he's like, oh, wow, like he escaped, oh my gosh. Now, keep in mind, this is a dying Shisui who is infected by poison from these bugs that are supposed to be paralyzing him and leading him to death. So what that does for his scaling, people like use it as an anti-feat, and they'll be like, oh, Shisui river level confirmed, because he falls into the river and dies. But it's like so dishonest, because if you take somebody who is in that state and they're still a blitz tier above somebody like Danzo while being heavily compromised, it's just really good for him. So I think that whenever you examine it, it actually really helps him, and it's, you can't say that that's the upper limit of his capability either, simply because he is heavily compromised. So do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, like, many people might critique the idea, well, yeah, that's great, but Danzo fucking sucks. And, you know, that's true to a degree, but I just wanted to add that, like, you know, essentially we know that chakra is consumed really fast when an ocular jutsu is active, especially if you lack an Uchiha body. Then it's even more devastating. So, like, take, you know, Kakashi, for example. He constantly has lower chakra reserves than the rest of his body, since his right eye is consuming so much of his chakra. We also know that loss in chakra also causes slowness and fatigue. So imagine Danzo, and not just one, but over a dozen of these damn Sharingan pulling from his reserves. So is his left eye's perception when Shisui blitzes him actually that bad? Or, you know, is there really much of a difference from when Shisui perception blitzes him to when he actually fights, Sasuke in the summit, when he's able to completely track perfectly a peak Kage Summit Sasuke, and not just in terms of raw movement speed, but Danzo's also shown relative to Sasuke in some instances, with like the chapter synopsis statement noting how like they pierce each other at the same time. So this means that Danzo's perception would obviously be a blitz level above this Sasuke, and Shisui is a blitz level above that perception. So logically, you know, he's a couple blitz levels above Kage Summit Sasuke. This is also likely not. This is also Shisui like without his MS either. So because he also just never activates it usually. So it will be a later thing, unless it's completely necessary and he has to use it. So And whenever the MS does come out, it's noted to like multiply his chakra and ability and things like this. So you have a really good ground for Shisui even through the Danzo encounter, which with all the support also from earlier points towards this, being that Shisui is actually really powerful and likely just higher than that Sannin tier and most of the Kage, which I mean even shouldn't sound crazy. He was already standing at the peak around Hiruzen's level and things like that, but I mean, like, I think about these arguments that I found, but like I remember that like what you mentioned earlier about how the birthday calls make note that Shisui was the shinobi who was so promisingly powerful. He was going to be aiding in the loss of not only the 4th Hokage Minato, but even the departure of all 3 Sannin. So it's so ridiculous. So him being like blitz levels, you know, like 3 blitz levels, we want to say that, above Kage Summit Sasuke at his peak, at least in V3 with his Susanoo, is not even that crazy. It's really not even that crazy. But yeah, do you want to add anything before we go on to the greatest duo ever?
No, well, I think one final thing that we need to consider is the fact that, and a lot of people don't like this, but it's just a fact, he should have some level of Susanoo. We're going to get into this a little bit later, but I just want to preface this by saying the version of Shisui that we are talking about is the strongest version of Shisui, which would be about 15-year-old Shisui, as he's stated to be a few years older than Itachi. Itachi meets him whenever he's 5, making Shisui about 8 whenever they meet, and then whenever he dies, Itachi is 11, turning 12. So you could argue somewhere around 14 or 15 years old, 16 at the highest, or at the reasonably highest, I would say. So keep in mind, 6 months before he met Itachi, right? 6 months before is when he awoke his Mangekyo Sharingan, all right? So that would have been whenever he was 7 or 8 years old, and then you fast forward, and now he dies at somewhere between 14 and 16 years old. So he had the Mangekyo Sharingan likely in both eyes for like 6 to 8 years. So more likely than not, he had some level of Susanoo, which is kind of confirmed by the Naruto website, which is kind of confirmed by the Naruto Top 99 sketch that Kishimoto did, showing him with like a Susanoo lance. So we'll get into that more later, but we just want to like sort of lay the groundwork as to like how much of a demon this guy is and why he was regarded the way that he was in the story. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and jump into that first matchup.
Yeah, so absolutely, and if you notice, I said duo, but this says each Akatsuki member on the title. Well, yeah, but let's be honest, Hidan, Kakuzu, Sasori, and Deidara are not going to be putting up enough of a fight for this shit to actually matter.
Yeah.
So I figure, well, let's just stick Hidan and Kakuzu together, put them in the same conversation, stick Deidara and Sasori together, put them in the same conversation, and show why Shisui beats the heck out of both duos. And I mean, so for Hidan, we obviously know that he shouldn't rival Shisui's power, like, whatsoever, or just anything around or above the Sannin tier. It's virtually impossible for him to even conceive of. If you want more than, so for Kakuzu, right, he's most definitely the superior of the two, which Hidan implies by himself whenever he states that Kakuzu is usually the doer for Jinchuriki capture, which is, like, their main objective, and things like that. And while they are relative in base, as shown when, like, they open the fight against Shiraku at the same speed, they react to the bomb fakes at the same speed, and things like that, this isn't even Kakuzu's main gig. It's actually just his hearts and ninjutsu, and you'll notice that Kakashi is completely intercepting and presumably the fastest one in the lightning heart. This Kakashi is also implied to be like relative to or just kind of close to Naruto's level, whether you think he's above or not, and regardless, Naruto is still relative to Kakuzu either way, despite him feeling utterly inferior to Hebi Sasuke, when in fact Shisui, by virtue of scaling massively above the later Kage Summit Sasuke, would also just be blitz levels above this Sasuke that Naruto would feel inferior to by, 3 or 4 times, which is obviously pretty nasty. He can then just capitalize on his body flicker, which is just so fast that the after images would likely even confuse Kakuzu, make him maybe fire out some false attacks, waste some chakra, and regardless, Shisui is also just above that Sannin tier for sure by virtue of his Kage Summit Sasuke scaling, as that Sasuke is kind of relative to that Naruto. Both are surpassing their mentors and their higher states to then kind of reach the level of the person who absolutely beat those higher states either way. So you can put some good lore into him just being above that Sannin tier by quite a bit, and he's also just implied to be able to fill the gap of all 3 later. So anyway, this is also just going to allow for Shisui to maybe even use some of his nature releases. I believe he has like 3, which are, but including but not limited to fire and wind, which he could use to potentially just like stick together to combat Kakuzu's if he doesn't just amplify a kunai or a sword on his back with chakra like how Minato and Tobirama do when they try to penetrate characters. But what do you think? I think this is a pretty nasty matchup.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so picture in your head 5 Kage Summit Sasuke versus Hidan and Kakuzu. Yeah. Now, picture in your head better Genjutsu for Sasuke. Okay? Now, picture in your head greater speed for Sasuke. It's just not close. Like, I genuinely, even if you only give Shisui the ribcage Susanoo, right? Like, which, Virtue and I were talking about this beforehand, and essentially we never see a Susanoo that I can think of use weapons outside of, like, the skeletal phase. They always power up to at least the skeletal in order to use their weapons, like swords and stuff. And so if we just lowball and say, okay, well, we see him with the Susanoo Lance, so he probably has the skeletal. What are they doing to get past that if he activates it? Also, if he is fast enough to be regarded as like Shisui of the body flicker, like that's his thing, and then we give him a Susanoo, which should be faster than himself based on like angular coverage and such, like this guy would just maul these two. I mean, Hidan has zero chance.
I was going to say, imagine the Susanoo, right? It's obviously going to be faster than Shisui. Every Susanoo is always faster than the user, so it's faster than Shisui. Even you said angular coverage is another good way to substantiate this.
Yeah.
So one of his weapons he has in the Susanoo is the Senbon, and Senbon are always faster than like whatever's being used to project them.
Yep.
So like, for example, the Chidori Senbon is noted to be like the only one that actually has something remarking its like speed and whatnot compared to the others, implying it's probably the fastest, which makes sense. It's obviously the smallest. It's not meant to be something that's super, hard hitting, but rather something that's quick. So, the Susanoo is faster than Shisui, and the Senbon are faster than that. So they're just going to be blasting through Kakuzu and his hearts and stuff like that. And obviously there's no argument to make for Hidan whatsoever. So I think this match is, although it's quite quick, it doesn't need much elaboration. Is there anything you do want to add to this?
No, I mean, they just get body bagged. I mean,
for sure.
There's not really, even if you like take highball arguments, you're not going to be able to get them to this level. So yeah, next.
Yeah, I mean, okay, after that, we got Sasori. And while you may know me to not be an avid Sasori hype beast, but today, no, I'm just playing. Nothing's gonna change. He sucks. And as of right now, his case against Shisui is actually stylistically incredibly poor. Now, I will say that there could be something potential, some potential high ends to say that Shisui's intellect, seeing as he is able to completely remove all of his organs consciously, showing a certain degree of medical skills that's basically unmatched. This may just allow for him to capitalize on potential poison strategies whilst briefly mitigating the Sharingan, which he should have knowledge on, especially if you account for how, like in the anime, his puppets have like a Sharingan eye. Sasori, in removing his organs, also just likely doesn't have a brain in his skull, but rather in his core. Therefore, maybe you could assert that like Shisui's Genjutsu wouldn't be able to lock in, although you could say that since he could just bypass the visual intersection, he could also just inject the chakra into that, or whatever's supposed to be the brain, or whatever controls him. But it might not even matter, as like for reference, the same Sakura who is able to react and perceive all of Sasori's attacks. And no, the only time Sasori doesn't try is at the very end when it's noted that he's not trying. Otherwise, he's screaming that he's going to kill them and they're going to die. So he's obviously going all out. She's able to perceive every one of his attacks and react to most of them, whether it be from his 100 puppets or his third Kazekage. She was still utterly perception blitzed by Heavy Sasuke in base prior to him absorbing Orochimaru, where he would then grow in power by training, and at least by activating his full curse mark, and Shisui, obviously scaling above that by a large margin, should be exponentially much faster, by several blitz levels faster than this Sasori. However, with that, he gets much worse, as he can not only amplify his chakra multiple times by using his MS, but it would also just allow for him to have an even sharper perception, allowing for him to see Sasori's core, radiating colored chakra, allowing for him to just stab through that, or cut the strings like Omoi does in the war. There's just so much nasty stuff. I mean, what do you have to say for Sasori?
I mean, this is a guy who was reacted to by a Sakura who couldn't tag a suppressed Kakashi from the beginning of Shippuden, who is relative to Kakuzu, the guy we just said gets body bagged by Shisui. Yeah, I mean, he's just gonna be too fast. We also know, like, this is something that you and I have both talked about before, I think ad nauseum. The Sharingan can see color, okay? Chakra as color, can see chakra through walls. We see in the Itachi Shinden novels, that Itachi is able to see his brother's chakra in the other room through the walls when he first awakens the Sharingan, by the way. So, like, this isn't even like you have to have a certain level of Sharingan for this. It's like, it just comes stock with it. So him being able to see the core, and him being just a super genius. I want you to get into some of that here in a second, because Virtue brought some stuff up to me that I had totally overlooked, which is actually kind of nasty in terms of like Shisui's intelligence. But like him being a super genius, him being able to see the core as color, and then be able to see the chakra strings, plus his massive speed advantage, plus his long-range ninjutsu that would be able to, like, counter a lot of Sasori's abilities. I just don't think he's ever going to get tagged by Sasori, and I think that he has the ability to get around everything that he has and just, like, blow through the Hiriko puppet and take out the core. You know, like, I don't really think that it's much of an issue, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, so it's actually really absurd just how smart Shisui likely is. So, for example, he's generally considered to be the intellectual hire to Itachi, who is kind of inferior to him in almost every aspect, but you can also chop this up to say age. Maybe if Itachi was a little older, it would be a little different, but regardless, Shisui's older than Itachi through the entire novels, from what we know. But the problem is, Itachi, he starts to contemplate Madara's identity after noticing him on the cameras, which he used to monitor the Uchiha, and he thinks about who Madara would be, and his first thought to who Madara would be somebody who was an Uchiha who died in the Third War or a war, and his body was not accounted for, and then they could uphold the name as Madara for like power. What? He just instantly figured out Obito's identity? Oh my god, what is this? So, you can literally just tell how smart Itachi is, and everybody knows how smart Itachi is. This is quite obvious. So whenever you put Shisui, say, okay, maybe he's an intellectual hire to that. Oh, maybe he's also an intellectual hire to Itachi, who, skills just under, he got just under Minato on the written exams, fastest force of death time ever. And I want you to know, in his graduations, things like this, whenever he does his kunai and shuriken throwing test, he's like, that was fastest in his whole class. Shisui could have done better, though. Like, it's like, what? So there's really a lot to imply here. Maybe Shisui just had a really cracked class. Maybe that's not why he was selected or something. But yeah, Shisui's intellect in figuring out what he needs to do here to say that, yeah, maybe I just stabbed that thing that's radiating chakra compared to the rest of his body. Maybe that's what I need to attack, should be a pretty obvious decision for Shisui. And I don't think Deidara is much better either, as one of the biggest counters against Deidara ever was the Sharingan. And what I mean is, it's not only the fact that the Sharingan sees chakra as color, as it can note what's in the air and the microscopic bombs, and Sasuke can he can formulate entire plans around this idea of his Sharingan giving him this advantage. But what this also means is that Deidara will likely act out of character because of the Sharingan. And well, you might not know what this actually means for the battle, but just to put in perspective, Deidara likely could have beaten Sasuke, and I've put many arguments out recently, and I don't want to just regurgitate the same stuff as to why Deidara is likely really close to CM2 Sasuke in speed rather than a base or regular one. So he actually could have done really a lot better, or even potentially won that fight with Sasuke if he wasn't being such an idiot. And what do I mean? Well, as he is advancing up to size up Sasuke, he skips straight over C3 for absolutely no reason. He skips straight to C4. Why does he do it? Because he starts to realize what the Sharingan can do. So he decides he's going to test his ability in the most flashy fashion he possibly can, and then he uses C4. And while the C4 has some higher ends, on the back of that the volume, it says that it's tipping the scales of the battle. So that's what's going to determine the rest of the battle. It's still the problem of Sasuke is in the third data book. It notes that Sasuke is overcoming Deidara's advantages through the mastery of his Sharingan. So that's pretty telling for what the Sharingan and what it can do, just how bad it really counters Deidara and his style. And the problem is, Shisui's also much faster than that Sasuke. And I've said before, just as I briefly just did, that this Deidara likely is close to that CM2 Sasuke. But the problem is, Sasuke during the summit actually is stated to have colder and thicker chakra, which is correlated to potency, something Fukasaku notes that gives you a real boost in ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. Genjutsu noted. So, if this Sasuke here is already stronger than CM2, and then he opens up the MS, and then he gets an even colder exponential amp from the Susanoo, then he gets a full chakra rejuvenation from Zetsu, and then he gets another Susanoo variant, and then another Susanoo variant, which both amplify him by massively, with the one just prior actually being said to be so exponential, Karin can't even recognize if it's Sasuke. Yeah, Shisui scales above that by multiple blitz levels. So you could tell just how badly he's going to be blitzing around Deidara with the already aforementioned advantage of the Sharingan. He's just going to be flying around. So what do you think? You give your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just, like you touched on earlier, if you just look at how stylistically that fight started off with Sasuke, first of all, he's not trying to kill Deidara, by the way. He's trying to get information out of him as to where Itachi is. So even with that, he's still able to basically physically blitz Deidara and swipe at him with his sword, but he's not even swiping at him, he's actually swiping at Obito. If we have, and that's using body flicker, right? So if we already have Shisui multiple tiers above that in terms of speed, and he utilizes body flicker as well, it's very likely that somebody who was known around the world for their usage of body flicker would use body flicker a lot in combat. So I think it's pretty likely that he would use it off rip just like Sasuke did. So I honestly think this fight is probably over before it even takes to the skies. Like there's nothing to me that would ever suggest that Deidara could react to that level of speed. And even if you go with like his higher interpretations from like some of his Edo feats, it doesn't really matter because you still can't quite get him to that level in my opinion. So I just think he probably gets blitzed and gets his head cut off before the fight even really begins. It's just like a totally different speed tier than where you can really get Deidara at. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess after that, we have Kisame. Now, Kisame is a really similar case, as there's really not much to actually substantiate him to be that high. So, for example, right, let's put it like this. Sasuke in the Summit with his MS, so the much weaker one than the one that Shisui is just blitz levels above, is able to react around the Raikage. He's able to use Enton faster than the Raikage. He can continue his lateral bolt of pain, things like this. So he's able to react to him, at least on lower ends and stuff like this. And then this Raikage, as virtue of being A, is actually stronger than anybody else in the village, which would include B at this current point in time. That's a note made by the 4th data book, by the way. So let's see how B stacks up to Kisame. Well, let's look. So Kisame gets blitzed around generally, unless it's in just relative to base B. I think that's very fine. I think you could say he's relative to V1B. I think that's okay. And because he's able to swipe him, especially with the aid of Samehada and things like this. So take it with a grain of salt to actually translate it over to Shisui, because obviously Samehada likes octopus flavored chakra. Shisui doesn't have octopus flavored chakra. So even in V2, maybe you could say they're relative because Kisame is able to put up his foot, but he completely still gets blitzed, and that's the problem. So if this Shisui is massively above that Raikage, and then is also hence then above this B, you then have a really bad tier as to say, well, maybe Kisame could do something, because it's just really not that likely. Shisui, again, I mentioned earlier in this opening section that like his fire style has to be countered by multiple water style users, so even this ninjutsu it is strong, regardless of if Kisame wants to take this into a large scale ninjutsu battle, which Shisui doesn't have to comply with at all, as I do think Kisame's water style likely is just stronger, and things like that. It's just way larger. It's able to overpower, or would have overpowered, a Hirudora if not for the Hirudora not having chakra, obviously. So he has a lot of really strong jutsu like this. His base Shark Bomb could overpower base Guy, things like this. So I don't even think Shisui has to engage in like a ninjutsu battle against Kisame, but would rather just like he can amplify his blades with chakra, go into the Susanoo, and then blitz around him that way, play to his own strengths kind of game. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so if the fight goes stylistically in the direction of Kisame, like if he's able to before Shisui blitzes him and takes his head off, or hits him with a genjutsu. If he's able to just like flood the battlefield, create just massive waves of sharks, it would give him at least some sort of advantage. But I think the fact that we can be fairly certain that Shisui has at least the skeletal Susanoo, even if you like discard the anime and the games, at least the skeletal, just based on like what we said earlier, him having the Susanoo lance, he should be able to deal with basically anything that Kisame can throw at him, aside from maybe the chakra absorption. If you think the chakra from the Susanoo can be absorbed, it is just called like an ethereal deity, like guard, So it's like maybe it doesn't work that way, but let's just assume for the sake of argument that it does, and like the hungry sharks can absorb the chakra, that Samehada can absorb the chakra. At that point, Shisui would be in a really bad place, but all he has to do to win is hit the red button, and the red button is Kodo Matsukami, which he can use without eye contact. All he has to do is be able to see his opponent's eye. So I do think that worst case scenario, he has to whip out the Kodo Matsukami if he doesn't just utilize his speed advantage off rip, or hit him with another ocular genjutsu off rip. Which brings me to another point. So when Ao talks about Shisui, he talks about his like unrivaled genjutsu, his body flicker, things like that. But like, we know that his unrivaled ocular genjutsu, we assume that it's in reference to Kodo, but it might not be. We know that there are other genjutsu that you can use with the Mangekyo Sharingan that aren't actually named. For example, Sasuke uses Mangekyo Genjutsu more than once, one of which is strong enough to break Itachi out of the genjutsu he's affected by, from Kabuto. So it's like, we know that this can be a really strong Mangekyo Genjutsu that doesn't even have to have like a particular, name or whatever. And if that's the case, then you could just argue that if he does make eye contact, like maybe that's a requirement, then he can just like GG him with his standard Mangekyo Genjutsu. It doesn't even need Kodo. But worst case scenario, there's nothing that Kisame can do about Kodo Matsukami, and I just don't really see a way that he wins here, because like there I see two scenarios. The first scenario is Shisui blitzes and or hits him with Genjutsu off rip. Kisame loses in that regard. The second scenario, Shisui doesn't blitz or use Genjutsu off rip and kind of like plays it safe, at which point he gets in an elemental disadvantage, a long range disadvantage. The Susanoo, worst case scenario, could get like countered by some of the chakra absorption, and then he wins via Genjutsu. So I don't really see a way that he loses. I will say he can get pushed pretty far if the fight goes favorably in Kisame's like stylistic way, but I don't know. It would just be like really hard to argue for Kisame here.
Yeah. So, I mean, another one, I guess after that, because I completely agree, I guess we would move on to Itachi, but I also want to couple him with Pain as well. And the reason being is I kind of implied this earlier, but Pain and Itachi are obviously hyper-relative fighters, or at least really close to being in the same tier. For example, there's a really easy narrative to go about this, so let's look at it like this. Both Sasuke and Naruto have these Sannin mentors, okay? The Sannin mentors have a higher form that's beyond the Sannin, okay? So then Itachi beats up that higher form of Orochimaru. Pain beats up that higher form of Jiraiya. Okay, so then both Naruto and Sasuke get a power that's noted on the back of volume 45 to be an ever-increasing power. Now, what you might note is that Naruto's power is obviously greater, right? Yes, it is, but in a different sense. So they are equal, but Naruto has to adapt to his after getting it. Sasuke adapts through whilst growing to achieve that equal state of just raw power. So what's this mean? Well, it basically means that while yes, Naruto in Sage Mode is stronger than Taka Sasuke, as implied by Zetsu as well, he's not stronger than peak Kage-sama Sasuke, as Sasuke has then evolved his technique to the same ever-increasing power to the same degree that Naruto has, which is why they state that if they fought, they would die. There's so many implications to imply they're equals. So then, you could even imply, okay, after their, relative or, getting around or trying to approach the tier of power of those guys that killed their Sannin mentors in their higher forms, which is the Sharingan and Rinnegan is their dojutsus. Then after that, they have to go on to face a guy who has a Sharingan and a Rinnegan. So it's kind of a shonen narrative there. Another way to support their powers being quite relative, just to help this narrative, even Hagoromo, whenever he gives them six-patch chakra, he gives them ways to amplify that chakra. Sasuke's is in the sense of an ocular jutsu, Naruto's is in the sense of a sage mode. So you can kind of see there that like this is really implied that Pain and Itachi are the same level of benchmark in these tiers for when they have to be equals and things like that. So the problem for Itachi scaling to Shisui, and why it's kind of weird to reconcile, is while you may think, well, yeah, Shisui was stronger than Itachi, he's definitely stronger. No, not really, because Itachi then gets the MS, and then slaughters his entire family. And in the Sakura novel, we get some implications from, like, Kido and his goon that, like, whenever, or Maguire, I guess is his name, that whenever someone dies, a loved one dies, the Sharingan gets like an exponential increase. So then Itachi is murdering his entire family, having an absolutely depressing dialect with his father about how he's always been proud of him. He's a gentle child just before he slices his head off. Or I guess he doesn't. I guess he just stabs him. And then he also has to move around their house, by the way, to make it seem like there was a fight. So he bloodies up their faces and punches them and stuff and breaks vases around the room so that when Sasuke walks in, he thinks there's a fight. And this is something you brought up to me a long time ago, I don't know if you remember. But, so Itachi's obviously getting quite the amp of tragedy through that. Then he gets both MS techniques through that. Then he gets to Susanoo after awakening the MS techniques. And then he continues to grow in power through fights and things like this, all the way up until he's at his peak, wherever you think that might be, whenever he's alive, which could be implied to then just be above 5 Kage Summit Sasuke at its peak. There's many comparisons by Danzo during the summit that whether it be their Amaterasus are similar or, their Genjutsus, they both have Genjutsu, but Itachi's Genjutsu is so much greater, it's a night and day difference and things like this. But then, whenever Itachi comes back in Edo, which would be a point revive sometime whilst alive, he stayed to finally, be equals to Sasuke. Sasuke finally caught up to his brother and things like this. So it's more close that that early EMS Sasuke is relative to Itachi rather than a peak Kage Summit. So this just means that Itachi has an exponential growth beyond what Shisui could reasonably scale above him in. And Itachi also just scales above the benchmark that we've used for Sasuke by quite a degree as well.
Yeah.
So then it's like more experience, likely a higher Susanoo, things like this. Yeah, Itachi
Yadamir,
is probably
Totsuka
just
Blade.
much. Yeah. What does Shisui really do against the Yadamir? Something that matches the attributes of an oncoming attack to then alter its own attributes in accordance to those and then completely null it out. What does Shisui do in regards to this? Nothing. Exactly. So there really isn't much of a case to say that, well, Shisui might be able to, because it just can't happen. That's just the thing. Even then, in the Itachi and Sasuke fight, we get implications that the ocular jutsu is only strong as the wielder, and their skills with it. So Itachi, with all this extra experience, 10 years more of experience from what he had whenever he used to rival with Shisui or whatever, that experience likely has been growing a lot, because he uses MS in almost every fight, even when he doesn't have to, against Kakashi and things like this. He used it also against Yagra in the anime.
Hold up, bro. He had to use MS against Kakashi. I'm not going to take the slander. Right.
Nah, you Oh, man. So yeah, he's definitely gotten a lot stronger, and there's just a lot better higher ends to say that Itachi's above, and then if you just say that Pain's relative to that, then they both just have ways around it. Like Pain has ways around it to say the Shenron Tensei or things like this. He can also absorb ninjutsu, whatever he does try. We do not the Susanoo itself, without obviously not talking about Yada or Totsuka, in Itachi's case, is just chakra. That's noted in Itachi's databook file, obviously excluding those two. So, Shisui's would also just be chakra, meaning you could imply it could be absorbed, it could be pushed back, things like this. So their Pain also just has a lot better stamina than Shisui, so they both have ways to get to scale above Shisui. Do you want to go ahead and touch on those two before we move on to the last one, which is more of a stomp against our boy?
I mean, here's the thing. Shisui himself tells Itachi that once he awakens his Mangekyo abilities, that he will one day surpass himself and then potentially everyone else in the world. This is then 10 years later, and now Itachi's Mangekyo abilities are fully matured. We know that because there are direct statements that talk about how, his ocular powers go even beyond the Mangekyo, right? Like the Susanoo that he uses is like the complete form of the Susanoo that you can get in that form. His Genjutsu is the strongest in the world at that point in time. There's like so many different things. The strongest physical attack, the Amaterasu. So it's like, if Shisui himself, who again just was able to decipher that this Madara was probably somebody who died during the Third War and wasn't recovered, like this genius, like if he's saying,
insane.
Yeah, he's like, one day, with what you have now, once you get your Mangekyo abilities and kind of master them, you'll surpass me. It just makes sense that Itachi had surpassed him. So I think there's not really much of a question for me. I do think it would be a fun fight to watch, but at the end of the day, like, if Itachi was, base to base approaching his level prior to Shisui dying, and then he had 10 extra years to train his base, he trains every day in character, and he gets the Mangekyo Sharingan.
Yeah, it's like I was gonna say real quick. It's almost like okay. So if Itachi has half as many wins in their sparring match, does Itachi double his power since he was 12? Probably. You know what I mean? Yeah, he likely does, and that's before the MS too. So after getting the MS and everything, does his power double at least? If Sasuke's is going up exponentially through the summer and Itachi's slaughtering his whole family, yeah, it probably is. But no, keep going.
Yeah, well, that's basically it. It's like, I think that we have a really strong narrative precedence to say, yeah, he should be stronger than Itachi there. So, I think that kind of speaks for itself here.
For sure. And then right after that, we have the easiest match of them all. Obito Uchiha, the absolute victim of our god Shisui, is going to slaughter him. No, I'm kidding. It's unfortunate. Again, you could make a case for this to happen, but that's only if you take that one statement from Itachi during the massacre and kind of imply it at its higher ends, which is something that just is kind of hard to stretch. Maybe you want to use your own headcanon to do that, then go right ahead, I guess. But without that, there's no real way to substantiate this. Again, we already said Itachi is stronger, and Obito still thinks of that older Itachi as kind of maybe a rival to him, maybe somebody that could kill him, something like that. Not so much that much younger one or anything like that, especially pre-MS or anything like that, or that earlier pre-MS one. So, yeah, for Obito, he has Kamui, things like this. So, for him, he's obviously going to win as well. I don't want to just beat a dead horse. But, do you have any closing thoughts before we exit this video out?
No, I think that, like, the community has just criminally underrated this guy. There's a reason why he had the fame that he did. Like, think of every other character, right, that had the level of acclaim that Shisui had. Somebody like Kakashi, somebody like Pain, somebody like Sakumo Haruke, somebody like Minato, Hiruzen, Hashirama, like these people that are known worldwide for their abilities, in particular for being the best at something, with him being the best at Genjutsu, and it's like, this
and
guy,
body flicker.
Yeah, and body flicker, and this guy's in that conversation with those people, like, as being regarded worldwide as the best at something. Oh, and everyone who has a nickname is typically pretty strong. Like, a worldwide, like, a widely held nickname, like Kakashi the Copy Ninja, Minato the Yellow Flash, you know what I mean? Like, even somebody like the Third Raikage, the Ultimate Shield and Spear, you know what I mean? Like, these people that, the Professor, like God of Shinobi, Sakumo Haruke, White Fang.
And people want to say that like his middle name was, or his nickname was actually just the River, or Gonzo level, or some BS, dude. The River is way stronger.
Well, so it's like whenever you sort of consider like everybody else who's in that kind of category, I think that this type of scaling does make sense. I know a lot of people just don't like Shisui for whatever reason. You need to go play Storm 4. But I think that we did a really good job sort of scaling him, providing a narrative precedence for where he should be, taking the feats that we have and scaling them properly. And, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. I know that Virtue and I are going to be doing a Shisui video on my channel here pretty soon, so be on the lookout for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Even over there on that video, we'll have more ways of interpreting his fighting styles and things like that, and more of his strength as well. That's, maybe there's some stuff mentioned here that wasn't mentioned there, stuff there that's not mentioned here. So you guys are definitely going to get the full Shisui spectrum if you listen to those two. But yeah, let us know what you guys thought. We really just wanted to establish that while most of our matches stylistically and going in depth on the battles themselves weren't super in depth compared to usually our other videos relating to the Akatsuki, it's more so that we really just wanted to establish Shisui and his power and how it stacks up to such a group and why it actually is much less close than what you think whenever you put him against all the lower members, because we really get down to the top 3, and before that he's really stomping them all. And that's really telling, because most people in the series couldn't dare to do some shit like that. So yeah, I just want to thank Sage for coming on here. It's been a really good time trying to learn more about Shisui and his character. But yeah, most importantly, as Sage Sage said, make sure you guys do make sure you guys let us know what you guys thought. Is there any more to Shisui that we didn't talk about? Do you guys actually think he is Donzo, ass level or whatever? Let us know, because, he might be. Maybe we are completely tripping. Maybe all this research was for nothing. But, most importantly, beyond that, God bless you all. Love you guys.